right. So happy y'all are here today. And I want to welcome you to our 183rd online gathering for faith leaders across the country. This regular gathering, called Courageous Leadership, is sponsored by ELCA's coaching ministry. I am Jason O'Neill. I use any and all pronouns. You know what? I didn't change my name. I just saw I'm still you, Joe. Let me do that real quick because that's going to be on the recording. I was so nervous about being here today. Just to name that too. And I'm the operations manager for ELCA Coaching and one of your facilitators today. So in attunement with the truth and healing movement of the ELCA and moving toward right relationship with our Indigenous siblings and neighbors, let us begin with a land acknowledgement. We are gathered today from all parts of Turtle Island, also referred to as North America, and we are connected by technology, by faith, by a common sense of purpose, by the breath given us by the breath maker who has named and called us here, and by the very piece of Mother Earth, the land that each of us inhabits today. We understand the importance and necessity of our acknowledging the land and the original Indigenous peoples whose creation stories are rooted in these places and who have lived on and still live on these lands throughout Turtle Island since time immemorial. We also understand that all land is Indigenous land, and we invite each of you to name in the chat the Indigenous peoples or tribal nations who were the first to love, pray, grow, celebrate, cry, drum, and sing upon the lands and places where you are located now. We know that Indigenous peoples are not historical subjects, but part of our communities, churches, schools, and leadership. And they offer invaluable wisdom for how we exist today and into the future in relationship with Mother Earth, as well as our human and non-human neighbors. If you're Indigenous, we also invite you to name your people or tribal nation in the chat so that we may see you more fully in this online space. Thank you all. We understand the importance and necessity of acknowledging the land and its original Indigenous peoples, and doing so consistently whenever and wherever we might gather, online or in person. Also, we understand this protocol is only a first step, and that as we venture into the world, we must learn more, do more, and realize healing and justice for the Indigenous peoples whose lands we now occupy. So let us begin this work by entering into a place of peace and listening together. Through these gatherings, we've developed a covenant of how we enter and interact in this space. We are committed to creating a safer and braver space in these gatherings, where each of us are able to bring the truth of who we are and how we're doing. And with all of this said, we proclaim these conversations are meant to be an intentional step to live more fully into God's dream for us as the body of Christ.
So friends, as Jason is getting his slides ready, if you don't already have something nearby, now would be a great time to grab some pen and paper or open up a document on your computer or start a note on your tablet or your phone for a little while in our presentation today.
Thank you, Jill. All right. I think I'm good now. So we are taking a deeper dive into the 4 pivots, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves by Dr. Ginwright. This first set of questions is not to shame anyone, but just to guide me in how I facilitate today. So I'm curious if you would mind raising your hand if you've read both the introduction and the first section on Pivot 1. A couple people, awesome. That's my next question, Jill. May I ask if you've read part of it, but not all of it? Like, so maybe a little bit of context, another 3 or 4, awesome. And I'm curious who may not have the book at all yet. A couple of those too, 3 of those. Okay, awesome. That's great. I kind of planned for all of this, so this is perfect. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. One reminder, we did offer an introduction to Dr. Ginwright's work and some context for his book during our March 27th gathering. I'm going to ask Jill to throw that link in the chat just in case you want to refer to that recording, those resources, etc. We'll also include that with the recording today. So if you just want to go to one spot to access it all, that'll be up after or by tomorrow. So as we begin, one practical piece I just need to name aloud is about copyright and the limits on what we can share in online spaces, especially when we're recording. So if you have read the introduction and the Pivot 1 section, a couple of you with me, I invite you to you especially to chime in along the way. And if you're wanting to read aloud from the book, please state aloud the page number and limit your sharing to like 1 or 2 sentences so we stay within copyright laws. And I just thank you in advance for your cooperation. If you don't have the book yet, or have not had time to read that whole first part, I will do my darndest to give you a high level overview today of the first pivot, which is awareness from lens to mirror. I will definitely ask for those of you who have read some or all, like things you noticed as well. And I'm going to offer a variety of ways for us to engage this material today. So various ways of learning, senses, etc. So the first way will be through song, as I invite Alanis Morissette and Michael Jackson to begin our teaching while also helping us to center ourselves for our focus today. Probably haven't heard that in a church service yet, right? So I invite you to pay close attention to the lyrics and we'll discuss them briefly afterward. So if you're not familiar with either or both of these songs, I only included about half for each of our purposes today. And I'm curious, what did you notice, particularly with our focus on healing and awareness? No one wants to unmute?
I'll unmute Jason. The message I kept hearing is it starts with me.
Hmm.
Yeah, this is Debbie. I would say the same thing. It's really about ourselves. The words I wrote down from Alanis is, although it's working for you, I feel disconnected, but that's really pointing at me, kind of thing. And then I love that Michael Jackson song. I could listen to that all day. And it's if you want to make the world a better place, you better look at yourself. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm just seeing the chat. Thank you, Jill, for responding. Any other thoughts?
I hadn't heard that Alanis song before. It's really good.
I hadn't either.
Yeah. And I was thinking how, yeah, I want other people to change because I know, I'm right and they're wrong.
Of course.
But it's just everyone, I really like that lens of love. That's really good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny when I just did some searching preparing for today, and yeah, lens, that was the first song that came up. I was like, I don't know this one. And yeah, some fantastic messaging.
And with that, I'll tag on to what Jen lifted up. I wrote down that same phrase, Jen, and I also wrote the lie that we are separate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That is especially in our country, we are spoon-fed that every day.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I recall, I don't remember what page, but I believe Dr. Ginwright references Dr. Martin Luther King's quote from his letter from a Birmingham jail about how interconnected we all are. Yeah, so I thought it spoke to that well also.
I was thinking of the lectionary from yesterday, where Jesus prays that he says, we are all one. Whether we think it or not, we are all one. And yet it's hard to see that sometimes when people seem to disagree vehemently with what I personally feel. And yet I need to be open to them.
Yeah. Or even just if they annoy us, right? I don't want to believe they're the same as me or I'm the same as them.
Yeah.
Just be vulnerable there for a minute.
Yeah, Jason, I want to read what Naomi put in the chat as well, starting with yourself and also appreciating that what each of us needs is unique.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, we'll touch on that some today. That's the mirror work we'll be talking about. Yeah. Well, I want to continue with the introduction, just for a little bit more context, but I may be gently nudging us through this portion to make sure we have plenty of time for pivot one, since that's our primary focus for today. I want us to look at 4 lies that Dr. Ginwright mentions. And so just framing these on page 10, he says, we have to first see how these myths force us to solve the wrong problems and lock into ways of thinking that don't always get at the root of the problems we need to solve. Thought that was said very well. So lie 1 from page 9. Fear, scarcity, division, distrust, isolation, all are at the root of many of the world's problems. Rather than trying to heal fear, scarcity, division, distrust, and isolation, which is really hard, we choose to instead to address the symptoms of these more fundamental problems. Thoughts, reflections?
I wrote in my notes on page 9 with that section you read, I wrote Band-Aid. We like Band-Aids.
We do.
Quick fixes, but it doesn't get at the systematic or the deep changes that we need to make, or looking at ourselves.
Yeah, there's that part too. Yeah. When you said Band-Aids, I was thinking of all the fun Band-Aids we've created too, like the Snoopy and the, I don't even know what other kinds they have, but yeah. So it's a cute Band-Aid, so it's okay.
Yeah. But it's helpful to just hear fear and scarcity called out, because that, having those broader underlying causes named, helps us move toward those rather than the more surface problems. So I appreciate that in his book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Jane. David?
My note in this section said that if these were easy problems to solve, we would have solved them already.
Mm-hmm.
These things just do not have quick and simple solutions. They require work of us.
Yes. Yeah, that part. And I would say probably work of us individually and collectively, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it gets messy, and we don't often stay in those places very long.
Connected to that, Jason, is another thing that Naomi put in the chat. We want low input and high output processes, as though we are machines.
Yes. Thank you, Naomi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or I just saw Andrea's note too. Yeah, technical versus adaptive change. Yeah, I think that's language he uses in the book too, if I recall. Yeah. All right. Lie 2. The more power we have, the more change we can create. And from page 11, let's see. This myth about power is not one to be taken lightly. And I know some of y'all will point out examples where activists and community leaders have organized and garnered collective power to force, fight for, and demand a desired policy or reallocation of resources. This form of collective power may lead to important changes and opportunities, but how do we account for the physical and emotional toll this form of organizing has on individuals? How does power come from us turning inward and focusing on our own healing? And he asks additional questions. I just feel like that context was really helpful for me, my own power stories. How about from others? I feel like this is a real good US one or Western culture one.
And I really like the next sentence right after that, Jason, where he says, what does healing have to do with social change?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that's really powerful, especially for not myself, but people who are just so involved or have been involved for a lifetime of trying to create social change, and the toll it does take on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know some of our indigenous siblings who've shared with us that, like, that truth and healing movement, I mean, they've renamed, they have started to realize in the last, I'm not sure how long, but it's probably been a while, but it's not just about white people healing themselves, it's also indigenous people, like, also having to do some work because we have done irreparable damage. And so, yeah, how do we start to do all that work again as individuals and collectively?
Jason, I want to point to what Pastor Karen has put in the chat. The changes that
Mhm.
are brought about are not lasting. And
Mhm.
Karen, just to clarify, you are pointing to the people that have more power. They can force a short-term change, right? Is that what you're saying, Karen? Yeah, but it doesn't have the same lasting power as Jesus engaging a person who's sitting on a mat on the Sabbath. And Jesus reaches out and says, go ahead and take your mat, get up and walk. Yeah.
When I think to the coaching lens too, right? We know that real transformation comes from within for clients. I mean, it's not at all, or not necessarily at all, but very little about the thing they're wanting to accomplish. It's really more about, yeah, what's the work inside that's going to help them do all their things. All right. Lie 3. We can strategize solutions for social change. This might be one of my favorite because I tend to be a strategy person. I want to believe that I can strategize my way out of anything, and it's just not true. So from page 12, the lie we tell ourselves, this is Jason, is that if our maps are clear and precise, then we can solve the problems of income inequality, climate change, structural racism, right? The list goes on. And then a little bit further down, by strategizing solutions, I mean the mechanistic and technical application of data, information, and plans to solve intractable social problems. That's where I remember that quote, Andrea, where your reference is technical.
Yeah, I mean, this part made me think of, so my high school senior, there's a math competition, a math modeling competition, and this year they had to math model the homeless issue in Seattle in 14 hours. Huh. And it really struck me what he was talking about, and then how we teach our high school students that math modeling, this calculus, will get us out of these really complex issues.
Mm-hmm. More Band-Aids, right?
More Band-Aids.
Yeah.
I wish math could solve the world's problems, but that's not how it works.
Maybe some of them, but yeah. Probably not just math, though, at least for sustainable change. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jason, this reminds me of, as a youth minister, one of the experiences that we hosted was after serving at a homeless shelter. We, a few weeks later, designed an event where the youth could live in a homeless situation for 48 hours.
Wow.
And we were given, access to cardboard to create structures to try to stay in, and a very limited amount of money. And it was so interesting, the difference between the debrief conversation after serving at the shelter, right? And then what they had to say after sleeping outside in a cardboard box for 2 nights on our parking lot. It was a completely different conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I want to name that those youth tumbled to very quickly, the adults in charge, were concerned that the youth would try to take resources from each other. And so we had strategized ahead of time about what do we do when it gets rough. And do you know what those kids did? They came to find us and they said, do you want to walk to Walgreens with us? It's the closest place, and we're going to pool our money to make sure everybody has enough to eat. And I mean, still, this makes tears come to my eyes. It was like, I didn't expect that. And to be honest, I was like, okay, so how many candy bars can I get for this? Right? Anyway, it was a beautiful learning for me as a leader.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yeah, Ginwright talks about to solve these problems, we need to move closer to them. And so to me, that's one example of, yeah. All right, I'm gonna move us along. And lie 4, us versus them. We're definitely getting a lot of this in politics for sure. So I like what he says on page 15. I mean, really everything. If you don't have this book, I cannot recommend it enough. So even though this is a natural human tendency to see the world as us versus them, so no need to have shame or judgment. It's just human for us to do that. This is a myth for 2 reasons. First, the criteria we use to determine the groups we belong to generally obscure the more essential elements of what it means to be human. And I know Jill and I've talked about this some through the courageous leadership lens and tried to touch on some of those topics over the last few years. And then what was the second one? I lost my place for a second. If somebody wants to chime in for a second. Oh, well, just I love his real question because he mentioned some wrong questions, but how do I cultivate the ability to still see the humanity in those whom I vehemently disagree with? Yeah.
Where is that, Jason? What page is that on?
Page 15. Yeah, there's several paragraphs there that I would like to lift up. And this is when he talks about the work of Grace Lee Boggs. She talks about reinventing revolution and bringing love. And this is what Dr. King called beloved community. So just to frame it for people in a few different contexts. Any other thoughts or feedback on that one? Other things you want to highlight?
I appreciate on page 15 the definition of belonging. Belonging is the capacity to see the humanity in those that are not like us, and to recognize that the same elements that exist within them also exist within us.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that, Andrea. Jane.
And I think the Christian sense that we are all beloved children. I mean, to hear a pastor proclaim that from the pulpit as they're pointing to political differences and talk about those, well, we are all beloved children. And sometimes in our faith traditions, we tend to look to secular ways to get at problems or conceptualize things. And I think the more we can go back to the fundamental core of the message of the gospel, the more we can ground ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Yeah, Jesus might have had a thing or two to say. Just one or two, though. All right, so I know we moved through those fairly quickly, but I want to make sure we have time for pivot 1. So if you're not familiar with the book, the 4 pivots are explained in 3 chapters each. And so from lens to mirror, reflection, truth, and clarity. So I want us to engage with reflection first. Actually, before I do that, I just saw that in the chat. Thank you, Naomi. Reminds me of, is it Paulo Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed? How even if the them is oppressors, they are oppressed by their own sin and also in need of liberation from the structures they are agreeing to uphold. Yeah, thank you, Naomi. So here's when I'm going to invite your writing materials or typing materials or whatever that works for you. So from page 30, I want to lead you through a short exercise that Dr. Ginwright includes in the book. If you've already done this exercise, I'm actually going to invite you to engage it a second time because I'll be curious if you have a different or similar experience. I just had that thought this morning. I think Spirit might be asking for something. So, so I want each of you to free write for 1 minute your answer to this question. How are you feeling in this moment about your job and the work you're doing there? And as you express yourself, Ginwright invites you to get it all out. No one else will read this. We're not going to ask you to share it. So I want you to be fully transparent with yourself. I'll have the silent timer going and I'll let you know when the time is up. So that question again, how are you feeling in this moment about your job and the work you're doing? And we'll take 1 minute. Okay, please pause where you are. I know it's not long enough, just a starting point. But I want you to assess, how are you feeling in this moment? Like, notice your body. How's your heart rate? If you were writing, how tight was your grip on your pen or pencil? If you were typing, did it feel like a faster pace than normal for you, possibly? And as you started noting, are these mostly your frustrations, your failures, your setbacks? So just a noticing, you don't have to answer aloud. So now I want to invite you to reflect and write your response to this prompt. What are 3 things you like about yourself that make you good at your job? And we'll do another minute timer. That question again, what are 3 things you like about yourself that make you good at your job? All right, I'm going to ask you to pause again where you are. And we're going to move to a second question. What are 3 personal achievements that make you proud of the work you do? And I'll start the timer again. That question, what are 3 personal achievements that make you proud of the work you do? All right, I'm going to ask you to pause again. I know you may not have finished any of the assignments, and that's okay. This is not about finishing. So check in with your body again. How are you feeling now? I'm curious if anyone would like to describe aloud or in the chat the difference they're feeling between the first writing prompt and the second two writing prompts. Okay, from the chat, calmer. I mean, I noticed a couple smiles during the second two verses of the first one. Oh, several more things. More relaxed, feeling better about my job. Okay, interesting. A lot more regret, self-doubt in the first prompt. Yes, that is a common experience. Sense of alignment. Okay. Such a shift. It's empowering to think of gifts and accomplishments. Yeah. I think sometimes we think of mirror as only the faults, right? Like, what are all the things we need to fix before we can go out? Or what are, like when people see us, what do they see? It also includes all the good stuff. Yeah. As people of faith, especially, like, yeah, we might have a gift or two that we can be grateful for and notice and celebrate and honor. So I appreciate Dr. Ginwright's questions on pages 30 and 31 following this. But how can a pivot to self-reflection support our collective healing and shifting our culture? What does a mirror have to do with social change? So I'm curious, for those of you who read or read part of, how might you answer those questions? I'll put them on the screen too. Do we see any connection yet? Even if you haven't read?
I think reflection is what helps us name the things underneath some of our struggles. And for me, it is often fear at the very bottom that is driving me. And if I can look that in the face and name that, that's often the start of healing and then freedom.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jane. That's a great example. I feel like fear is probably one of the big ones for most of us, and especially around big issues. Yeah. Anyone else?
Jason, I see some reflections in the chat. Pastor
Good, thank
Karen
you.
says, a sense of awareness of what's going on within me right now. One healthy person makes the system more healthy.
Yes, beautiful, Karen. Thank you.
Right. And then Pastor David says, you operate from a sense of wholeness and giftedness instead of lack or regret.
Yeah. I mean, the difference that makes, right? And how we're showing up to the problem even, or the problems.
I would add too, I talked with several friends about this, that like the things that we're fighting for in, whatever communities we're supporting, if we don't think that we also deserve them, what are we doing?
Right.
And
Yes.
yeah, we're just reflecting like what change are we trying to fight for in spaces where, maybe we don't see ourselves as a part of them or something. It's like part of the us and them. And I think it was Bryant Myers in Walking with the Poor. He talks about like the God complexes of the non-poor and how like that's a manifestation of that.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. I love that we're doing this together. I love them. I'm not like, or I don't feel like I'm teaching. I hope I'm just inviting, and yeah, this is awesome. All right, so I want us to transition to truth. So I'm going to read from page 58. And what does truth telling have to do with mirror work? And why does it matter for us individually and for our society? Truth telling is the practice of testifying to yourself and others about what is real and honest from your perspective of the world. Over time, this process builds integrity. I'm going to read directly what he has here, the opposite of bullshit, and keeps us emotionally honest about what really matters. I love that line. I mean, and again, I could read the whole chapter. Like, it's all really good stuff. So recommend starting with this question. What's the truth about myself that I've been avoiding?
And as we're pondering that, Jason, I want to refer people to what Jen put in the chat just before you started reading, because it just tees this up beautifully.
Thank you.
Self-reflection helps not to get caught up in outrage that seems to be running our politics and media. I mean, Jen, it's like you knew what Jason was going to pick up next. Yeah, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
I'm also reminded of the speaker, I think it was last week, who talked about what is a person or an event or a situation in your life that has shaped your political values as a way to help people move beyond the arguments and the casting aspersions and go back to what is grounding you. And so I see, yeah, those are related here.
Yeah, some correlations for sure. Thank you, Jane. We have that recording up if you missed that and want to catch it. Yeah. What else might you highlight from the truth chapter?
Jason, the other thing that this sparks for me, and I think that we've said this in this space before, is when I notice in myself reacting extremely strongly to someone, in my first step should be to pause and look at myself in the mirror and ask myself truthfully, what is it about me that I'm avoiding or hiding from myself that's causing me to react like this?
Yeah.
Often it's mirroring something that's
Right.
deeply seated inside of me. And that's a hard one. It takes courage,
yep.
right?
He says it over and over again. This is the hard work, which is why we don't do it. Yeah. And who takes time for self-reflection? I mean, it's why I gave you like 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. I mean, we don't do that. Even if you have prayer time, meditating time, like church time, like all those things. But how much is self-reflection or reflection with spirit on what's going on, how you're feeling, where are you headed? Yeah, not just where are you moving away from. And I'm saying this to myself, right? Not to any of you. Yeah, you're my mirrors. All right, so I think Jane referenced this. This isn't necessarily a Christian book or even a religious book, but Dr. Ginwright includes this scriptural reference on page 84. He doesn't quote it where it's from, but it's Hebrews 11:1 on clarity. And before this, he writes, clarity allows leaders to confidently answer the question, what are you creating? We know what you resist, but what are you building? These questions get at the heart of clarity because in the fight for justice, we often become so absorbed in resisting oppression and confronting injustice that we lose sight of the beloved community we really wish to create. Like that's said beautifully too. Any thoughts or reflections here before I invite us into our next activity? All right, so we're going to try something a little bit longer. I want us to give a little bit time to dreaming those two questions. So individually and in community here by writing again. And so I want you to think about these two questions. And I would invite you not to censor or filter yourself. You can always edit later. And invite spirit into the space with you and really dream about possibilities, no matter what your thinking brain may be telling you as you write. Write anyway. And so this timer has some light music to it. I'm hoping that will help fuel some creativity. And here we go. to invite you back. I'm curious, did 5 minutes feel like forever or nowhere near long enough? And do you notice the video I chose to go with that one? Art, always moving. I don't know. I just tried to think about the things related to the work we're doing. So how did it feel to begin to put into words what you're moving toward versus focusing on what you don't want or what you want less of? So I'm going to invite you to keep your dreaming to yourself, but what did it feel like?
It felt really healthy to affirm myself like that.
Interesting. Love that. Thank you, Jen. I see from the chat, life-giving, positive, grateful, thankful, attractive, like being drawn forward into something. Love that, David. Future-oriented. Yeah. We don't have to be stuck where we are or where we've been. Awesome. Thank you all. Oops, I went too far. So as we wrap up today, I want to invite a couple minutes of, if you would like to answer one of these questions, possibly. This is actually from the work that we did with the workshop people who hosted this first. So I'm thinking from your head, right? What is something you learned? Maybe from your heart, what's something you are feeling? Or what's a commitment you're making? If anyone feels like sharing aloud or in the chat. Learning to forgive myself. Yeah, Karen, thank you. How important it is to dream. Yes, thank you, Andrea. Yeah, I feel like this book is reminding me of that for myself too. It's real easy to get caught up in the task lists.
And Jason, I'm going to just speak out loud, taking what Andrea has said. I'm going to be more intentional about what spirit puts on my heart in the form of dreams and ask, how can this become part of the goals that I set? An intentional part of the goals.
Yes, thank you, Jill. Also seeing feeling thankful in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Demi. So may we intentionally and compassionately bear witness to ourselves and to each other as we move toward healing-centered engagement. So join us next week as we welcome back Brenda Smith and Tammy Devine. And as ascending today, we invite you to watch this 1-minute clip.
Of all the words you'll ever hear, remember these. Life is too short to eat celery. Life is too long to feed jealousy. And life is likely just the right length to need therapy. May you be seriously silly. May you be wickedly kind. May you be brilliantly dumb sometimes and yet stupidly bright. May you certainly have doubts. May your weirdness be the norm. May the coolest thing about you be your warmth. May you be powerfully vulnerable, or at least mightily soft. May you be a contradiction and yet at the same time not. And Whether you were any, none, or all of the above all, may you know that you are loved.
Jason, thank you so much for this work. It is so lovely to have a different approach and a different style to how we gather in this space. Friends, I don't know that we all understand the lengths to which Jason goes to when he prepares for this. And just really thinking about accessibility for everyone. And so thank you, Jason. We feel seen and we feel valued and we feel loved by you. And may we each go out and share that. Next week, friends, we have the privilege, it's Tammy and Brenda, right, Jason?
Yes.
So we have the privilege of Deacon Tammy Devine and Pastor Brenda Smith being with us and sharing a bit more about their dream, their vision that Spirit has put on their hearts to host a National Day of Prayer. And we are proud in ELCA Coaching Space to be sponsoring revelatory steps along the way. So look forward to that. Go with God, friends. Thank you.